What does it take to have our folks able to apply for and achieve that? And so I'd like to ask Dr. Sorrells to come up and give a welcome on behalf of the college, and we appreciate them letting us utilize this facility today.
So good morning and happy Friday. Morning. All right. For all the elected officials, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the work you do. Senator, thank you for the effort to get back and get that mini budget in. It's very important to community colleges and our enrollment growth going forward. Before I proceed, I would like for you all to acknowledge and call attention to our staff that does all the setup. We've had meetings in this room every day almost this entire week. They are a group of professionals. They never miss a beat. When we had the Office of National Cyber Director here, they bugged us to death for 2 months because they didn't trust us that we could pull off a high quality program. It happened, and it was because of that professional staff. So if you would please give a round of applause for the staff. So Robert, thank you for this timely matter. A friend of mine, Ted Abernathy, is going to give you some really important data, and I will tell you this data is very timely. Community college system has now put a new funding proposal out, Propel NC, which means everything we do is going to be aligned to the labor market, and we will keep alignment to meet those high need workforce requirements for our state. So thank you all for being here today. I'm anxious to hear what Ted has to say because I know it's going to be very informative. Thank you.
A large portion of what we're going to talk today will be looking at where we stand against our competition. But most importantly, we'll be later on talking about where we can go from here. And that portion especially came from a conversation I had originally started with Mayor Colvin and the City Council about if we had X, what is the most expedient and effective way to deploy it to enact the greatest amount of tangible change in the trajectory of our workforce and our students' lives going forward. And so that is where we're going to come out today of what can we do to move the needle, because we often talk about what the problem is. Today we're going to talk about potential ways to work our way towards a solution. And with that, Mayor Colvin, I'd like to invite you up to say a few words.
Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to see all of you this morning. But Senator McKinnis, thank you for spending some time with us this morning, and Mayor Bellflower from Hope Mills, thank you. I have to acknowledge my colleagues on the City Council, Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Jensen, Councilmember Brenda McNair, and Councilmember Malik Davis. Let me make sure I don't get in trouble that I miss any City Council members. But I just want to say, kind of echoing Robert's, probably a couple of years ago, it dropped into my spirit as to where and how prepared was our community for the future. And out of that conversation, I pulled together a small working group concentrating on next generation workforce with members of the various communities. City Council has been extremely supportive in this effort, and had our city manager and his team did a great job coordinating with Robert to take a look at it. And out of that, we thank all of our private sector partners, the county, all who collaborate in the effort of economic development. And out of that came this great report, which will be enlightening to us, because it is hard to plan where we're going if we don't really have an idea where we are currently. And so I look forward to Mr. Abernathy and the words that he has to say. But further, more than that, I look forward to us as a community having a collective plan to work together collaboratively to take us there, to wherever it is. Great communities plan how they're going to be great, and they reap the benefits of it, and we see it all around us, and I know that we have all of the components to do it. So again, thank you, Robert, for pulling this together.
Thank you, Mayor. And the things that we do, from the college to the school system to our sites across the entire county. I know that Chairman Adams, who is also with the mayor, a member of our board, likes to say, if it happens in Hope Mills, it happens in the county. If it happens in Fayetteville, it happens in the county. That it all, at the end of the day, happens in the county. And so I'd like to invite Chairman Adams up for a few words.
Good morning. I'm going to be brief today because the report is more important than what we have to say here today. But I do bring you greetings on behalf of the county, and we do have our Vice Chairwoman, Tony Stewart, here. Glad to see her to be able to be here. Our manager had some emergency, so he won't be here today, but he'll get a copy of the report. But the Mayor Colvin and I have talked extensively about collaboration, not just for the city of Fayetteville and Cumberland County, but for everybody, for every municipality in the community, as well as our community colleges, our two universities that we have here, Fayetteville State University and Methodist College. That's the only way we're going to be able to do this, is to be able to have a collaboration, even with our K through 12, as we deal with that and what we're going to do to be able to bring industry here. But the thing that I think the mayor and I talk about is, if you don't have a strategic plan, you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you can't get there. And so we got to have that vision. And I think we've heard Ted before. I've had conversations with him. I think today what he's going to present is some good things, but there's also some other things that we truly have to work on. And if you don't talk about the bad things and the gaps that we have, then you're not going to succeed. So hopefully we'll be able to get there. But we need everybody in the room, all of our partners, to be able to come together to say we're going to make this work for this entire community. You know, as we were talking about it just briefly, and I'm going to get out of the way, one of the problems we have, you know, we've been talking about rail from Fayetteville to Raleigh. We've been put on the back burner because they talk about the Wilmington, because we've got to come together as a community with one strong voice to be able to talk about our community and what we want. And we definitely can't leave out Fort Liberty. That's going to be that connector piece that we have. So I hope you all enjoy and get out of this. I hope we got some papers so y'all can write some of this down. I don't see any papers on some of these tables, but anyway, we'll give them some. Thank you all this morning.
Thank you. And I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge that everything we do at FCEDC wouldn't be possible with our team. And just as importantly, the leadership of our board. We have Chairwoman Cox, we have our Vice Chairman, Tim Bryant, we have Diamond Spain and Carl Manning, our officers. And if would other members of the EDC board, if you would just stand up for a moment. Raise your hands, the like. Thank you. So we've had some wins announced. We've had some great things like the titanium projects. We've opened up Amazon. We've got buildings coming out of the ground. But at the end of the day, if these jobs are not filled by our folks, we are not maximizing that opportunity. And if we want to win that next generation of better paying job, of highly skilled, of future-proofed industrial and technology and office jobs, we need to have the talent to attract that. So it's a twofold question to ensure that we have a viable economic future for our community from an industrial and economic standpoint, but also one for pathways to prosperity for each of our citizens here and each of our students coming up. And when it came time to look at a tactical and strategic plan, there was one name at the top of the list for us. I will not bore you with his bio, but to tell you that this gentleman has worked around the country with communities of every size and of every strand to build a pathway to a better future. There's none more well-versed and more well-experienced than Ted Abernathy. And Ted, tell us the good, but be honest with us, because that's what we need to hear.
I'm glad to be here for a whole bunch of reasons. American Airlines tried hard last night to have me not make it here, so which is fairly normal. I've been in Arkansas and Missouri all week. I'm in the doghouse at home because I left last Sunday, and then I live in Charlotte, and the tropical storm hit. And my wife was there by herself, and so having come home last night, I'm also happy to be here. I didn't get locked in some small house out in the backyard. It was good. What we're going to talk about today is a lot of data. So I apologize if you hate data. Then I hope your phone's charged and you have something to do. The trick to data is pretty simple. Data by itself is boring and doesn't tell you much. Data in context is information, and information is what you use to decide what you want to do in the future. When we started working with Robert and the team here a while back, we, let's see if we can get this, there we go. We started with what the issues are in workforce. People talk about workforce all the time. It has been the most talked about topic in economic development now for almost a decade. Decade before that, it was other topics, and I'm beginning to think that electricity and power supply is going to be the topic for the next decade, but workforce doesn't get any better around the country. With declining birth rates and changing demographics and a bunch of other issues, we're all going to be struggling to find workers as we go forward. The three issues that everybody talks about is that there aren't enough people in the labor force. We don't have enough people to fill the jobs. The people we have don't have the skills that people are looking for, and those skills are moving pretty quickly. So unless you're continuously reskilling yourself, you're going to be out of luck. And then the third thing is that it's hard to get into the system, and there's no such thing, of workforce development because there's a lot of different programs. The federal programs are about 20 different silos. We have some state programs. So people tend to default correctly, I think, to their local community college or their local workforce board. And all of that becomes difficult. If you're a regional employer, you might have multiple groups that you're dealing with. And so people talk about this all the time. What we did here is start with the basic strategy model that all of you use in your businesses and your governments. What's your current reality? What do you want for the future? And are there any ways to get you from here to there? And that's what we do in every community. We're working in 26 states right now, and every one of them you start with that exact same thing. So we're going to spend a great deal of time today on what the current reality is and what we heard. And I'm going to do it a little bit out of order today because I'm going to tell you first, we interviewed lots of people in the community, focus groups, lots of one-on-one interviews, and we heard a mixed bag. And I don't think any of this will be a surprise to you, but every employer we talked to told us the same thing. Labor's hard to find, and it's hard to keep. And if you're at the lower end of the wage scale, it's almost impossible to keep. There's a great turnover, and you're always hiring. We heard that skills are absent, that people just couldn't find the skills they wanted to. And that little model on the left there, we used to hear this all the time when we went in communities, and they'd say, people don't have the skills. And we'd say, what kind of skills are we talking about? And it was always a different group, and so we tried to get a little bit more granular about it. Sometimes there's the basic knowledge skills that the K-12 system gives people, and if you hear in a community people can't read and write, then okay, now we're having a K-12 discussion. You know the soft skills, we call them life skills, that everybody complains about, which is people don't show up, they're not motivated, they don't get along well, I mean, all that. And you hear that everywhere. You're not special here. And that is everywhere we go, every place we go. I don't know. I've been doing this a very long time. I'm very gray now, and I still don't know how you teach a 28-year-old to change their personality. I don't. My first job ever was working for the city of Baltimore, and I was a budget analyst for a program called Jobs Plus that taught people soft skills. That was 1980. We could pull the curriculum out. It was on transparencies back then, but we could pull it out and it would look the same. The work skills have changed a little because now we talk a lot about teamwork and communication and collaboration and all of that. The job skills, if you go into the building over there that says 2201 on it, you can see how you get job skills. You want your phlebotomist to know how to take blood. You want your mechanic to know how to deal with your car. I mean, those are specific skills. And then we have future skills, things that, integration with technology, dealing with people that are different than you. I mean, there's a bunch of new things emerging. But when we went out and we asked here, we heard that people were ill-prepared with their soft skills. Again, hard to deal with that when the person's already an adult. The military employers said that they were doing okay getting the skills that they wanted, mostly, and nobody else. So I would say that as the employers of choice, they're cherry picking the best people, and those people are going into those jobs, and they do pretty well. The manufacturing and distribution companies were having trouble with entry workers and basic technical skills. People don't know how to do, they said, well, they used to grow up on a farm, and then you had to, we hear that everywhere too, but you heard it here, basic skills. So somewhere along the line, there's going to be a national revolt to have 8th graders all take a class on basic skills and how to read a tape measure and how to turn a screw or do something. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen someday along the way. Or we're going to have a YouTube channel that parents buy into that their kids all follow. We heard that Fayetteville's K-12 system, sometimes the crime rate, and when I say K-12 system here, I'm talking about the reputation or the perception, not necessarily, nobody can quote data. So think about that. Your crime rates and sometimes the appearance was a barrier when people came to town. Now, Robert, you said be honest, so this is what we heard, it's what the employers told us. We also heard that companies lost people when they came and drove through town, that it wasn't pretty enough. Take your pick of whatever word you want there. But a common theme was that even if people were graduating high school or even graduating community college, that the ecosystem to get them into the career wasn't great. And I know President Sorrells will tell you that that's actually the next frontier of where community colleges are tying closer with the work that the Senate and the House are doing to get them to be continuous career matching. So maybe we've got our first big step on that. We heard the community college a lot. People are you're a community college system here that everybody's aware of, and we think that they thought the skill sets coming out of here were great, but people coming in the front door didn't have all the skills needed, so you ended up with remediation a lot, and you didn't have enough people coming through the door on a regular basis. We also heard that you guys have done this several times, but there's been lots of plans, and that it's time to actually implement a plan. So, especially on the quality of life side, and I've been coming back and forth here. I'm a native North Carolinian, so I've been coming back and forth to Fayetteville for 50 years, and I'd say there's a lot of things that are different. And so you've implemented things along the way, but people don't think you've got to the end of that. And then there was a lot of discussion that there didn't seem to be a consistent, coordinated way that you did this. It was episodic, it was multi-organizational, and when you went to talk about it, there was not and we do corporate comms as there wasn't a brand narrative about how you were dealing with all this. Nobody could answer that question for you. You didn't talk about it in the same way. So all of that were things there. When we pulled it all together, there were 3 things that were common from the stakeholders. You needed a better coordinated and more aggressive system for building your local talent. You needed more effort on the technical and soft skills, starting pre-K all the way through to match it with the industry needs. And as I said, I know that that's a new thing that everybody started on. And you needed more urgent and resource plan to build Fayetteville and the region, the Cumberland County region, sense of place and safety with accountability on those measures so that you can show that this is a great place to live. Because in the end, attracting people to the community is going to end up with that as being one of the key factors. Does the new person want to live here? And when I show you data, you'll see that that's one of the weaknesses, not that they don't live here. You haven't been successful in attracting them. So then we went off and did what we do, which is all the data analysis. And so I'm going to send you a bunch of data analysis. I'm sure Robert's happy to provide the copies of these as we go forward. There'll be a report in about 2 weeks, and we'll share the report widely. Have all these charts and graphs in it. So if you want to take a picture, but we'll try to make it a little easier than that. When we look at labor force nationally, there's some big trends. Business community around the country has very similar ideas about what it is their struggle. Part of that is simply that labor is hard to find. Nationally, there have been declining birth rates for a long time. We used to have 3.5 kids per woman. We have 1.5 kids per woman now. Is there anybody I know who thinks that that's going to go back up anytime soon? So declining birth rates are the sort of the root cause of not having abundant labor everywhere. We have been stuck at low unemployment rates. They've come up a little in the last couple of months, but we've been down near record unemployment for several years now. The labor force participation, which lots of people like to talk about, for 25 to 54-year-olds is the highest it's ever been in recent history. So there are not a lot of people on the sidelines. So there's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of people unemployed, and there's not a lot of people on the sidelines. We even have record numbers of women working, record numbers of people with disabilities working, record numbers of minority participation. If you want a job, you can have a job. And a bunch of people have said yes. On the other end, we have a whole lot of 50-somes and early 60 people who have said, time to quit. One of the things that everybody got wrong about 15 years ago was they assumed that when life expectancy increased and you were healthier, 65 is the new 45, y'all remember that shirt, that everybody'd work longer. Well, it turns out they don't. Turns out that they're going to quit earlier because their 401k looks better and their house value soared, and a whole lot of people are saying not only are they not going to work, and just to give you some idea, if you're 40, about 85% of you work, and if you're 60, about 40% of you work. So it's a huge difference, and we have a whole lot more 60-year-olds than we used to, so the whole average comes down. But it turns out that a lot of people are early retired. And then for America, and I'll show you data, there's now a growing dependence on foreign-born legal immigrants. And we'll talk about that. In North Carolina, we're lucky as a state, low unemployment. We have low participation rates here. Part of that is the fact that we're Southern, and culturally here, it's a little different. So if you're up in the upper Midwest, the culture is everybody goes somewhere to work. If you're in the South, there's still a female home taking care of the children and household that overlays part of that. So I didn't mean to offend anybody. That's just the way, if you look at it on a map, that's the way it looks on a map. Strong in-migration to North Carolina, but North Carolina has terribly uneven growth, and I'll show you some charts on that. So when we talk today, well, I'm going to talk about sort of 3 geographies in today's numbers. We'll talk about Cumberland County, we'll talk about the Fayetteville MSA, which is Cumberland and Hoke, and we'll talk about the city of Fayetteville. So whatever the slide says at the top is what I'm talking about for that one. If we look back here, this goes back a decade, what you see is the labor force is very flat. Over that period of time, in fact, we're a little down in labor. We don't have as many people to work in Cumberland County as we had 10 years ago. We have more jobs. We actually have added 5,000 jobs over the last 10 years, but we have fewer people, really tightening the labor force here and forcing us to bring labor from outside the region in. If you look at participation rates here, they're lower. So I told you North Carolina's was lower than the U.S. Yours is lower than what the U.S. or North Carolina has. So participation rate is the percentage of adults over the age of 16, in the way this data is done, that are either employed or unemployed. They've declared that they're in the labor market. So your numbers are down, and there may be some way to squeeze some out of that. If you look at educational attainment, you can see Cumberland County's in the blue, the Fayetteville MSA, which includes Hoke, is in the orange. You can see North Carolina's in the gray and the United States. You have over here on the, about normal for people with a high school degree, but over here on the bachelor's side, not so much. This is high school degree or less over on the other side, just only a high school degree or less. So your educational attainment rate's lower, and why that matters is this slide. So the U.S. participation rate, the more education you have, the more likely you are to work. And so as your education levels are lower, your participation rates by math are also lower. So people who have less than a high school degree, only half of them are in the labor force. And they may have all sorts of reasons for that, and you can dig down and whether they're disabilities or other things, but they're not in the labor force. So that's a direct impact on you. You do not have as many self-employed people as the U.S. has. U.S., about a quarter of people work for themselves. And you can see over on the right side, if you're in personal care or some sales or some construction, those numbers are pretty high. Obviously, in the military, nobody gets to work for themselves. And since you have so many military jobs, that pulls you down. If they are working for themselves, someone at the base probably should be aware of it. But and we don't have any independent protective service people. So part of this is because of the makeup of your jobs. You also don't have as many people working from home. Your numbers are much less. And if you look at who works from home, the military doesn't typically do that. And so it's funny around the country, farmers, fishermen, those kind of, they're home-based. That makes a lot of sense. But you're not, most of the people who are working in this community are working for somebody else, and they're getting up and going somewhere to do it. We looked at your turnover rates. So this is how many times a job in a place turns over. And so this is actually, turnover rates, data is data. Some of it's survey, some of this. The turnover rates are determined by looking at Social Security numbers that work for a company 1 month and don't work there the next month. So it's pretty good data. And so what you see is your service-based jobs, 126 turnover means more than 2 people a year are in that job. If you look over at food and beverage service, 265%, more than 3 people a year are in that job. So it turns over every few months. Some things don't turn over as much, but if you can, I put just the high ones over here. Everything on this side turns over more than once a year. So when we heard from your companies that turnover was an issue, it's an issue. You have a lot of people job hopping. Some of that, we'll get to wages in a few minutes. So for those of you who jumped ahead and said, wait a minute, what about, we'll get there, I promise. But turnover is a key issue. And part of that is company training, and part of that is people hopping, and part of that is people patching. They'll work for a while, stop, and do something else. All those things come into play. We also looked at the foreign-born workers in the Cumberland County, and you can see that both the numbers in workforce and in your population have been going up, but you are still half the national average. You have very few foreign-born workers. Some of that will, again, have to do with the base and the fact that, what's going on there. But if you look over on the right, occupations on the far right, more than 75% of the people in those occupations are foreign-born. So tailors, manicurists, even painters, painting workers, construction painters. If you look at the middle one, I mean, between 40 and 75% of your physicians, your pharmacy techs, your drywall people, your tile installers, your radiology techs, these are all things that if I go out and talk to those companies, they have a hard time finding. They're having trouble finding enough people locally for those jobs. Part of it is that your foreign-born groups are smaller. And nationally, I don't know if this chart's in here, but nationally over the last 12 years, we've gone from 15% of our workforce in America being foreign-born to over 18%. And again, this is foreign-born legal. So all the illegal stuff, they don't fill out a lot of surveys, so I don't get a lot of data from them, so not here. We also looked at your in and out commuting, and I think the bottom line is that 37% of the jobs in your community are filled by people coming from outside, and 47,000 people here, almost 30% of your workforce goes outside the county for work. You have a huge movement in and out of your region. When you look at the in-commuters, what they're coming in for the jobs are, some work at the military, but there's a lot of installation maintenance jobs, some of the business financial, and also people in your healthcare and education industries are coming in from surrounding counties. So for Robert, one of the things we looked at is Robert's trying to land projects, what's his labor shed? And so we look at 45-minute drive times. Typically, that's our typical labor shed. And you have about 500,000 people that live within 45 minutes of the center of Cumberland County. So when he's selling, he's going to be selling 500,000 people.
I nudge it close to the line, though, you know.
Yeah, I understand. So for each set I'm going to do today, I'm also going to tell you what I think the takeaways are. So each section. So the takeaways on the local labor force, jobs have been growing, but labor force has been flat. You can't continue to get more jobs with your labor force flat unless you're just providing jobs to the surrounding counties. Your participation rate is low, but it has been improving. Your educational attainment numbers are low. Self-employment and work from home levels are low but growing. Foreign-born population's growing and critical, but it's well below the national average. You're very dynamic in and out on a daily basis. You probably can go out on the roads and figure that out pretty quickly. And your 45-minute shed is about 500,000 people. We then looked at what's growing and shrinking in your area, so the emerging industries and future labor demands. So this is an infamous cluster bubble chart. And everybody likes cluster bubble charts, and actually nobody likes them. But what it means is that in the right top quadrant up there, so, I don't know, yeah, it shows here, that quadrant up here, those are the places that you have a lot of concentration of companies and they're growing. So you can see that the only two up in that quadrant for you are the federal government. By the way, the circles represent the size of number of jobs. So big circles like, you know, federal government services, which means military, pretty big. It's not great to have an economy so dominated by one area. Good news is the bottom right side, this one, you don't have a lot of concentration. It means your concentration is lower than the national average, but it's growing. So on the way up here are everything from distribution and commerce to design and marketing to insurance to financial services to business services, all on the way up. On the left top quadrant are places that you have a good concentration. You probably had a lot at one point, but they're not growing. So vulcanized and fired metals, tires. Over on that side, lighting equipment, paper and packaging. And then if you're down in this quadrant over here, you've never had a high concentration and the numbers have been slipping some. So we look at all of these things, and these charts, everybody has to sort of show one of these charts because that's what clusters look like, but we like these charts better. So this is the top traded clusters by employment. You have 60, almost 7,000 people in the federal government services quadrant up there, so it is huge. And the middle column is the growth over the last 4 years. And so the biggest growth has come in your federal government. And then the far right column is what the average pay is, and that's $84,000 for that group of people. So a huge part of your economy is concentrated in the growth there. Second is distribution, 66,000, growth of over 1,000 jobs in the last 4 years, a little bit lower pay. You can see that education services, business services, and then technology is next. The good news is there's not a huge drop in anything except construction products and services. It's been a weird last 4 years. I think we can all agree on that. So some of the data has been influenced by the pandemic. But the takeaway from here simply is the overwhelming number that comes from one sector. If you look at the sectors that are growing the fastest, again, federal government near the top and distribution, but then also technology growth. And the tech jobs that are growing, we've added almost 400 of them in the last 4 years, and they pay over $100,000 a year. So it's an area that deserves some tending and support as you go forward. So clusters come in two categories. The first that I've been showing you are called traded clusters, And that's the places where money comes from outside of the region into the region. So all the taxpayers in America, right, pay their income tax, goes to the federal government. The federal government sends it down to Fort Liberty, and you get to spread it around here. Manufacturers are like that. Technology typically is in that realm, tourism. But there's also local clusters. So about a third of jobs are there. And if you work for the base and the money comes there and from a traded cluster, then you go out and you spend your money at the barber shop. Don't know if you have to ever do that, but maybe you like a different coif than they give you at the military, or a restaurant, or anything else locally. If you shop or if you do anything, those are called local clusters. And within the local cluster world here, health services, like it is in 99% of communities, is the next biggest thing. And your local health clusters over the last year have been the last 4 years, pretty stable at just adding about 100 new jobs and $75,000 a year average wages. Both hospitality and local education and training took some losses through the pandemic. They're on their way back up somewhere, and I don't know what the count here is, Mark, what your employment numbers are, but when we get to 24, maybe they're back up some. Okay, so you'll probably see those numbers pop back up sometime soon. You also see that local real estate, construction, commercial services is growing. Down at the bottom, logistics locally growing. So we can see where all the jobs are and go forward. We also looked at what happened post-pandemic to occupations. So those are all industries. And we looked at occupations, and two things sort of jump out. Well, one on this chart, one coming up. The first is that the red dots are where you're losing jobs in occupations. Blue are where you're gaining. You notice that up the vertical axis is the salary. And the jobs that are being lost, by and large, are low-paying jobs. America is automating low-paying jobs at a rapid rate. Didn't for 20 years. And now, all of a sudden, we've got automation religion for those lower paying jobs, and a lot of them are disappearing. And so as they disappear, those people who were job hopping, who felt like, I can go work for a little while, I can go work for McDonald's for a while, then I can go work for this hotel for a while, then I can go do this, because I only need to work this much, there are going to be less options going forward. So that job hopping is going to get more difficult. It also, on the good side, the higher paying jobs are growing. That's good, but they require higher skills. We also do an automation index, and we look at which jobs by type are disappearing due to automation. And you can see things like cooks and fast food servers and material servers and some of the construction trades disappearing. So that tells us initially which jobs are starting to grow and which are not. We looked at your job postings. They're still robust. You're still above where you were before the pandemic started, so there's still a lot of available jobs in the region. You can break those down, and the top occupations by demand still are business service specialists, so people working for companies and mixed jobs, human resource specialists, nurses, sheriffs. Everybody around the country is having, I have a son-in-law who's a deputy sheriff, and he gets approached all the time, somebody trying to poach him. He works for Guilford County, with more and more salary and crazy benefits because people cannot find policemen and sheriffs these days. So these are all at the broad level. We then spend, and by the way, this is unique job postings. The number one thing that everybody's asking for all the time is nurses. I think President Sorrells, and I'm sorry, I've known Mark a long time. I usually refer to him as Mark, so I'll try to be good. You mentioned that nursing, you're soon going to be, what'd you tell me, third biggest nursing program? Third biggest nursing program in the state. There's high demand for it, so congratulations on that. Then we'll just have to make sure everybody doesn't come steal them, because nurses are in seriously high demand. Earnings went up some during the pandemic. They had to, because inflation reset about 20% higher. Across the country, it turns out that inflation went up about 21%, and wages on average went up about 20 or 21%. If you look at the data, we're basically where we were from an inflation standpoint, but not evenly distributed. So some salaries went up significantly more than inflation, and some didn't keep up with inflation. So individually, you may be doing better or worse than you were beforehand. We looked at your median income cost of living adjusted by occupation. There are very few occupations here who pay above the national average, even assuming for your cost of living. So there's a lot of jobs that fall into that lower middle range, and I'll show you all of that in a second. And then I'm not going to go through these in detail today, but we looked at real deep dives into net new jobs over the last 5 years on this kind of chart. So this is new jobs up the vertical axis and what they pay across the horizontal axis. So up in the box on the right, and you'll have all this data, not on this chart are military occupations because there's 3,655 of them and they would make the chart look ridiculous. I couldn't make it work. You wouldn't be able to see anything else. So that cooks and the people who fill orders at distribution centers are all way over there in big numbers, and you can see the wages, which are not very high on here, and the jobs. And then over on the other side, you can see that physicians have the highest wages, but only about 200 net new jobs over that period of time. We then took all of this apart. And I apologize for doing this to you, but we looked at it for the jobs that have come based on needing a BA or higher. You'll get to see all of this. Needing some college or higher. So on this, you can see the people right now that need some of the technical training, the new jobs that showed up in the last 5 years: auto techs, firefighters, paramedics, computer support services, avionics, psychiatric techs, medical assistants. Those are all the type of things that drive the decisions and the discussions here at the community college on what are you going to be offering as you go forward. And this is looking back, so the last 5 years. Then there are jobs that just required a high school degree. And then some that did not require any. And if you're a food prep worker, by and large, nobody cares if you had a high school degree. It'd be nice if you could do the job. But as we said, it's hard to find people at that level. We also then looked at projected jobs over the next 5 years in each of those categories. So Robert and his team has an idea that, again, military off the chart again, but automotive mechanics over there, electricians, you still have cooks over on this side, but software developers, health service managers, and we did this for each thing that looks at BAs, some college. But in about 2 weeks, you'll have a full report with all this. But as far as I'm concerned, Robert, they can have the slides anytime they want them,
But
too.
you don't have to try to catch it all.
No, you don't, God, please don't try to write all this. I mean, if anybody here has written all of this so far, then I want to hire you now. I need you. I'm always looking for people too. What you got out of all of that was that post-pandemic, with automation and societal changes, a lot of low-wage, low-skilled jobs are going to disappear. Some already have, and more are going to. So you're going to have fewer jobs available for people with no skills, with who dropped out of high school or just have a high school degree. A lot of those jobs, which were already pretty low-paying jobs, are going to start disappearing. And so you're either going to have a group of people that need to be skilled up, or you're going to have a group of people to deal with social services and other things because they have no means here. That's coming. Fort Liberty dominates the labor demand, both in terms of overall jobs, in terms of jobs being created and all. That's not a secret to anybody here, but it's also a fact. We're doing work in Onslow County now at the base down there, and sometimes you just have dominance. We also, I'm in northwest Arkansas. I was in Bentonville yesterday. If I take out all the Walmart jobs there, then and that's their corporate headquarters, then a third of the county's jobs disappear there too. So lots of places have a dominant industry. You have one that's pretty stable. The demand for tech workers and manufacturing workers is growing. Earnings have increased some in the last few years, and there's still really good demand for lots of technical skilled workers, everything from auto and aircraft mechanics, dental and nursing assistants, software developers, computer operators. You have a lot of demand for people that can be trained either through certificates or AA programs here at the community college. There are a bunch of training assets in the community. It's worth having a discussion on all of them, but I'm not going to go through every one today. You heard the chairman mention before, Methodists and Fayetteville State. We're here at the community college, we talk about that a lot, the school system, and you're part of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council, Workforce Council. All of them play a role in training people as you go forward. We looked at Cumberland County's annual post-secondary completions that are less than a bachelor's degree. This goes through 22. We do not have last year's yet. They're not all out, so at the time we did this. You can see they're a mixed bag. Those spikes and drops in there, some of those have to do with COVID. So give me another year or two on the back end and we'll be able to give you flat where you are these days. I know that here you have a big jump in some of those programs. When you look at bachelor's degree or higher, the big jump over recent years has been in health professionals at your universities. And so that's a good thing. A lot of other have been pretty flat. And so demand for, especially in the computer science area and some other things might be driving some changes in the future. And then we're big fans of Polytech here and different ways of doing K-12 education. So all of those things need to be called out and your businesses knew them and said nice things. You are part of a workforce board down here. If you do that 45-mile draw, you're part of, I think, 5 workforce boards. So getting collaboration around where you're drawing people from, being a regional hub, those same workforce boards draw to the Raleigh-Durham area, they draw to Southern Pines. Some of them, even on the southern end, draw all the way down to the Wilmington area. So my guess is that if you did a study of where all your graduates end up, they'd end up a lot of places. But if you can tie them to internships and apprenticeships locally, you'll have a greater chance of keeping them here. We then did a thing looking at your competitiveness, the Cumberland Hope County MSA compared to other MSAs around the area. So let me define competitiveness first for you. In our company, we do locational analysis for companies. We're doing one today. Somebody was talking to me on my drive here today. A company trying to move out of the Northeast, looking at a southern or western location, and here were their 6 or 8 things they were talking about that they needed. They tend to talk first about business climate. So what's the tax situation, the regulatory climate, the legal climate. Good news for you is North Carolina scores high on all of those things. They're top 10 in almost all of them. What's the workforce like? Are you getting in migration? You saw here that your labor force has been flat, so that's not going to help you. But that you look at skills, the ability to train, the cost of living, the quality of life. When you look at infrastructure, Robert's not quite old enough, I am, to remember when infrastructure meant did you have water and sewer and a 4-lane highway, and if you had a site that could be ready in a year, you were good. Doesn't work quite that way anymore. Today, infrastructure means ready sites, but it also means broadband, and it means housing, and it means child care. And, and this is truth. 5 years ago, when people talked about power, they talked about the cost of power and the reliability. Could you get dual feed? And now everybody's talking about the quantity of power. Do you have base load that will deal with data centers and AI and plug-in hybrids and everything else? And so infrastructure has changed quite a bit over time, but it still have to have water, sewer, roads, and all that. You just have to have more. I don't have this slide up today, but I've told people that I've been doing this 44 years. I have never had a time in my career where workforce development, community development, and economic development were more intertwined. They've always been there, and they've always talked a little bit to each other. And now, if you're an economic developer, you've got to have housing data and housing start data, and how many child care slots are open, and are there any second shift, and all that is now part of the game because people have ready access to data analytics. You want to know about the innovation capacity of a region, the universities, the patents, the advanced industries, and then the biggest change since COVID is the center. So in 2019, businesses had strategic plans. And in 2020, they realized that none of them were worth the paper they were written on because the world had changed. And I mean, quite honestly, if we think back to the last decade, and I mean, we talked about pandemics. You know, we all worried that there might be a pandemic in the world. I mean, remember SARS and all? I mean, we had these conversations. So it wasn't something that came out of nobody had ever thought about this before. It just happened. If you are in Jonesboro, Arkansas, you had a tornado go through a few years ago. You're in the Midwest, you know tornadoes go through, but you didn't prepare for it. And so businesses since the pandemic have started really evaluating risk. And so we do weather information for companies, we do crime information, we do fiscal stability of local government, state government. If you're going to move to, people talk about moving out of Illinois. One of the reasons companies move out of Illinois is that they have only funded about 45% of their long-term pension commitments. The tax bill will come due sometime, and people know that. And so that's risk for anybody moving there, whether people are out migrating. And then we get crazy things now like, can you tell me the supply chain of the major employers? Because if they're Chinese or somewhere else, then they might get disrupted. And then we'll have a disruption in our community. So risk became a huge thing. So when we start talking about competitiveness, we're talking about a lot of different things. And we start with a company with 100 things they can filter. Everything from direct air service to water supply to whatever, and then they pick what's important to them. When we look at your overall metrics, the number of businesses in the community over the last 15 years is up by about 20%. The real GDP over that period of time is up about 5%. And you can see employment's grown over the last 5 years, but it shrank for a while before that. So your net is only 2 percentage points above what it was 15 years ago. If we look from just before the Great Recession, so 2007, everybody flying pretty high, to today, the growth in the metros in North Carolina is a real mixed bag. So the U.S. grew 12% in jobs, North Carolina grew 17%. And in North Carolina, Wilmington above the 17, Wilmington at 22, Durham at 22, Charlotte at 30, and Raleigh right at 40. Everybody else something different, and Rocky Mount, New Bern, Hickory, Greensboro, and Goldsboro actually lost jobs over that period of time. So Fayetteville at 4% growth, same as Winston-Salem, but it wasn't a lot of growth until the last few years where you've picked up again. If you look at population changes, for the last few years, you've been flat. A lot of the growth in North Carolina is concentrated. You know that. That's not a surprise. Probably the growth in the Wilmington metro is one of the strongest, and odd to see. The good news on this chart, if you're a longtime North Carolinian, is the purple's where you're shrinking, and I can remember about 15 years ago where that purple was pretty much almost everything east of 95. And it looks like it's stabilized over time. This is one of the ones that sort of jumps at people. If you look at the population growth of our metros, overall the last 5 years, you can see that everybody's sort of near the middle, and Raleigh, and if you add Durham to Raleigh, it gets you to 85,000. So you get 85,000 in Raleigh and 91,000, 92,000 in Charlotte, and everybody else is playing a different game. So your numbers here aren't great during that period of time. You're in the boat with a lot of our North Carolina metros. This is the projected growth of, if nothing changes. So projections are the things that you look at to make policy changes to make them wrong. That's the way we approach them. So if nothing changes based on past data, the growth of your labor force will stay stagnant. Now you're red on here, but it's really close. So if you change a little bit, you'll turn to light pink, light green, I mean. But it's right now your region is not projected to have much population growth, and this is, if you had to start figuring out your strategies, trying to grow the population would be really close to the top of that, trying to grow the labor force. We looked at all of the people who rank metros around the country. Out of the 361 by Polycom, you ranked 228, but that's 30 spots better than the last 5 years. You've got a bit of a tailwind on a bunch of these. Milken had you 180 out of 200. You can see your friends in North Carolina. By the way, under Polycom, 228 puts you about the same as Greensboro and better than Winston-Salem and Hickory. So again, it's a mixed bag in North Carolina. U.S. News this year had you the 113th best place to live in the U.S., and that's out of 330, and that's the best you've done in a long time. So again, some tailwinds on your quality of life, best place to live. We looked at, we tracked the top 150 metros in the country on about 400 different things. You do great in the age of your population and your cost of living. You are the 8th lowest cost of living of the 150 most populous metros in America. Probably I could win a bar bet on that one, I think. Women here earn almost as much as men. That's a high number. Your advanced industry growth, which you don't have a ton of advanced industries, but they've been growing in the last 5 years, and that's probably some of the tailwinds you have. And then your change of the average home value was the 15th highest. Now that's going to make you less affordable as you go forward, but you saw some uptick. On the negative side, your growth in STEM completions wasn't real high. You do not have a lot of people in the top 1%. So your top 1% of income earners is poorer than most MSA's top 1%. So not a lot of wealth. Your poverty rate's high. Your GDP per capita output is low, and that means in America, the data is pretty clear that what an employee does in terms of output really does correlate directly with their wages. And so getting the jobs up that have people have more output capital will help you there. Your violent crime rates are in the top 5 worst, and the percent of population that live within a 5-minute walk of a public park are near the bottom. So quality of life issues are still out there to deal with. We looked at your education and income. Overall, your cost of living in North Carolina even is the county, as counties go, these are the urban counties, you have the lowest urban county cost of living. The good news there is when people are considering a move, affordability is one of the top 2 factors they consider. That's new, by the way. It wasn't that, those numbers weren't there 5 years ago, but affordability is now really high, and it's something you have a high card to play in. If you look at the unemployment rate and the earnings, you understand that your low education level is one of the things that results in your low earnings level. It's a pretty straightforward line. The more education you have, more typically you would assume more skills you have, the more money you make, the less likely you are to be unemployed. We looked at the percent of the population of all the cities in North Carolina, the overall BA or higher. These on the left here are the 10 most populous cities in order from Charlotte down to Concord, and you have the lowest percent of your population with a BA. Now, again, you have a large military base with a lot of people that skew that number, and so I don't want to, you can never forget it because of the size of it and what it does to your numbers. We looked at the population locally with a BA or higher degree, and again, this is an area that you end up low on. And then we looked at the percent of households by income level. And this is something that I don't know that a lot of people spend a lot of time here. So for the households under 50,000 annual income, you and Pitt County are among the highest. For counties between 50,000 and 150,000, again, you're high. So being high in those two means necessarily that you're going to be low in the percent of higher wealth. This is Cumberland County, so only 10% of the people here living in the county have incomes of over, again, this is household, so this might be 2 people, over 150,000, as opposed to Wake County, which is now 30% of the households make more than 150,000. We also looked at all your jobs, not just your people, but your jobs in the county. 70% of the jobs here have salaries between 30 and 75,000. So you are heavily dominated by that group in the middle. For the number of jobs that pay low, but minimum wage and low, has gotten pretty low in the country. So you're going to be pretty even on those. But it's that low center that you are concentrated in. And so this is what, and I'll leave this one up for a minute for you to look at. This is the percent of jobs by wage group for Cumberland, Durham, Pitt, and Wake. I just picked those 4 counties because you could at least see them on the chart. And what you see, you're the green here, and you see that $30,000 to $50,000 jobs, how much of your jobs are concentrated in that one area, which is much different than the other. Now, if you look at Pitt, it's even different from there. And the number of jobs you have that pay over 100,000, significantly lower than Durham or Wake. And I think you probably knew that ahead of time. But this is where I wish our people made more money. I think you're right to wish that. It's a job skill mix and match that's the issue. Your home values have been growing like everybody's in America, but they're still relatively affordable. In North Carolina, the average home value is now over $300,000. This has come along pretty quickly, and I can remember when a $300,000 home sounded like, everybody would be living in a mansion, and now, in the, 10 years, it just all changed on home values. We also looked at who's cost burden. Cost burden pay more than 30% of their income on housing. And for all of the major counties in the state that track this, you have the most cost burdened households. Now, your houses look cheaper, so how did that happen? And the answer is the house burdens is overwhelmingly on rental housing. So your rental housing is considerably expensive for the wages that we have in the community. So this is an issue as you go forward. Think about rental housing and how you're going to deal with it. I don't know if it's a supply-demand. We didn't do a housing study, but I don't know if it's a supply-demand issue or something else. But this is cost burdening. So the difference in shelter, so again, if you instead of spending 30% of your money on shelter, you spend 40%, it means you have less to save for education. It means you have less to spend on retail locally. All those things sort of ripple through the economy. So from your economic performance, your population and labor force has stagnated. You don't have a lot of new people moving in. Your low educational attainment levels have contributed to a concentration of mid-skill, mid-wage jobs. So you haven't been able to break out of that. Your rent burdens are contributing to economic hardship of some of your citizens. And then lower disposable income ripples through the whole economy, meaning you don't, again, have as much money to spend on restaurants, entertainment, retail, those types of things. So all of that gets you to the so what question. Now you got a bunch of data, and I think that your issues are fairly straightforward. They're not nuanced too much. So what do you do about it? If you want a better workforce system, a more perfect workforce system in America, you need data continuously so that you can make adjustments and policy decisions, and you need the capacity to make those improvements. You also need to resource those things that were making an impact. So if your community college is money poor, then you can't train people for the jobs you need. If your K-12 system can't afford machinery and equipment for their CTE programs, then you have a problem there. If you have bad early childhood daycare or early childhood education, then you're setting people on a path. So again, I wish it was a nice, easy way of answering it, but you need all of those things, and you need somehow in a community to have the collaborative capacity to bridge all of this complexity. It's not one thing. You have a lot of issues that you need to pull together. So we were asked during our contract with Robert and working with the city and the county, how do you improve the economic prospects of the citizens to increase employment and wages and raise the standard of living? And the short answer is you upskill existing workers in their jobs and you target higher wage jobs, not here. You're here, you've got to step them up because you've got to train existing people. This isn't all about an 18-year-old. This is about 35-year-olds that need to move up. But you need to upskill those existing workers with targeted wage, and you need to pair that with industry training. For the elected officials in the room, our favorite recommendation to state legislators is that they have money set aside to allow companies to upskill their own workers. We don't want them laid off because they're not skilled, so you have to pay them unemployment and then take them through a year of not having wraparound services, so they end up dropping out of where they were, and companies have to go, look, if you can help companies upskill, it's a great thing. Bottom line is there's an increase in in-demand skills, and that will, I think, over time raise your wages. What we heard on the stakeholder side is we can't find people with those skills. So this is a perfect match. If the skills are there, they pay more. If you can just train people, you will increase the living standards of some of those people. We were asked, can you develop a workforce to attract the top tier growing companies? You've got to have more people. I mean, if you want more companies, they look at your labor shed and they say, not a lot of people moving into it. If you have low unemployment and somebody is going to move into your labor shed, they will move for two reasons. They think they can attract people from surrounding counties, or they think they pay a little bit more and can take somebody's existing employees. That, you can decide, that's a public policy decision, and puts an economic developer in a pretty tough position because you're talking about existing employers versus new employers. But if you've got a finite set of employees that are in the labor force, that's where you end up. I think focus on school to work transition programs, STEM programs, apprenticeship programs are how you begin to do that. If you've got people coming out of the pipeline, the bottom line is more people with intentional connections to employers lets employers continue to grow. And again, what we heard from stakeholders is we're struggling, so better coordination between those workers and young people, emphasizing awareness and skill development at younger ages. We also heard how can we recruit the companies that would train the graduates of Fayetteville State and the community college and Methodist and the soldiers after they serve. And then to get them to stick, to root here, you've got to focus on the quality of life improvements and the rebranding of your narrative and brand so that people want to live here and want to stay here. You have a lot of things that are positive. You have to fix some things that are hurting you. And the things that are positive you need to talk about a little bit more. Media narratives are pretty simple. They follow whatever it is your brain already thinks about something. That's how you get someone to read something or think about something, is you attach it to something they've already heard. So it doesn't have to be new information. So there's a lot of tricks to branding, but you have to break out of a branding narrative that you already have, and that should help. We were also asked, what direct actions could you take? What do those cost? And key performance indicators. So we look around the country at what's worked. We are in an amazing time for everybody trying everything. I mean, the number of actions around the country is amazing on workforce. And so there are a group of strategies that typically work if they're done well. Everything from, strategies around ex-offenders and older workers to increase. So we looked at them and tried to determine what we thought we'd recommend here. There are 4 areas of focus we think you ought to work on. One is the ecosystem. You've got to build collaborative capacity between the workers. I'll talk about that in a second. You've got to raise career awareness opportunities among teachers, parents, students, and all of y'all, community leaders, on what's growing. You've got to retain more people and grow the labor force through placemaking and services to newcomers. And you've got to target at-risk youth with intensive services. You've got a group in every community that are somewhere in the 18 to 28 range that have been disassociated somehow with the labor force. Sometimes they come with pretty tough issues around them. You cannot fix that on the cheap. You have to deal with that pretty hard. So we made recommendations, and I shared this with a small group a few weeks ago. We think you ought to strengthen the ecosystem by creating a new independent nonprofit. We don't care where it's housed. It could be at the community college. It can be the city, county, EDC, wherever. But patterned after the Made in Durham, which is an all stakeholders at one table, we put prices on this, and I think that you can't get past the fact that it takes collaborative capacity to get people to collaborate. People collaborate when it's in their interest to do so. So my interest isn't the mayor's interest. If we had a collaboration and I told him it wouldn't work, if he told me what he wanted, if it wasn't in my interest, eventually I wouldn't do it. And somebody would have to broker that between us somewhere along the way. We think, by the way, I'm going to make just a few recommendations. They total $1 million. So I'll go ahead and give you the end of the line here. But one is this broad thing, collective impact model. No matter who's in the room, no matter who has a different agenda, you have to have a common agenda, not exclusive common. You still do what you're going to do, but together you have a common agenda. You have shared measurements on how you measure success in that agenda. You work together on the things you've agreed to work together on. You have transparency and communication both to yourselves, but also to the community and especially to your investors. Rather than collaborate when it's convenient or it's episodic or we decide one year we're going to do something, you build that backbone capacity to collaborate for the next 5 to 10 years, long term. The career awareness stuff is important, and I know your school system's done a bunch on it already. There are lots of opportunities to make career awareness better. So this is a prejudice on my part, so I'll just go ahead and say it. I don't think that you permeate the brains of 15-year-olds. Some of you have heard me say this, but I think pouring career awareness on a 15-year-old is like pouring water on a duck. It just runs off. You have to pour that career awareness on the teachers, but you really have to pour it on the parents. And so as you change the model, you focus heavily on the parents. The STEM East model is that. They started with coordinators and teachers that went back into the schools. It's educators talking to educators. It's people talking to parents. The Be Pro, Be Proud U.S. model now, we recommended that first RV to the Arkansas people that started the program in 2015. And now it's in 8 states and continuing to run, and North Carolina has adopted it. The reason it works is not because putting a lab in a truck is a magic. The reason it works is that thing is huge and sits out in front of the high school, and parents go look at the labs in it. And then they go home and they start talking to their kid, and they find out that little Jane and Johnny always wanted to work on this or that and didn't really, when they went to first year of college, they didn't have a major. They didn't know what they were going to do. And we told them they ought to go. And I have a son that I use as example number one, that when he went to East Carolina, he didn't know what he wanted to do, but his mama was sure he was going. And he went. And he got out of school and had no idea what he was going to do. And like a lot of 22-year-old boys, he spent about 5 years trying to figure that out. And at 27, he started his own construction business. He didn't go to construction school, but he started his own construction business. And now he has, I think it's 3 people who graduated from ECU with construction degrees working for him with their general contractor's license, and he's an entrepreneur. And he does great, and I'm pretty sure he's gonna be able to take care of me when I get old, so this is great. But he had no idea, and we did a terrible job of giving him career exploration. We didn't talk about anything that he should have done. And so a huge part of this, and we think you start with 2 coordinators out there, and that's 130,000. The STEM East program is one of our favorites. It is not perfect, but it does have quite a bit of impact in that part of the world. You've also got to build a new sense of place here. So I thought I'd use an exotic one for you here, north of Normal in Fargo, North Dakota. Now, my bet is that everybody in this room had the exact same image of Fargo, North Dakota when I said the word. Was the first thing you thought of cold? Yeah, So I can tell you, having been there the first week of December one year when it was 40 below, cold's a good answer. I was going to fly up there, and I said, how does one dress for 40 below? And they said, bring your goggles. I live in Charlotte. I said, goggles? You mean like the underwater? No, your goggles to keep your eyeballs from freezing. I didn't have such a thing, but I did buy them. Fargo's growing. Fargo doesn't have an image that you'd want to be in Fargo too much, but they have figured out how to have a sense in Fargo of what they're good at and to build what people need. There's a lot of places around America that have figured out how to rebrand themselves. And you've got, when you brand, you've got to have a brand image, but your brand image has to match your brand reality. I mean, data's easy, as you can tell. We can get data on anything. So if you can't tell people that you're the this or that, and then the data doesn't show it. But you can position yourself as a great place to live, because I bet half this room would, put your hand up and say, yes, it is. But you've got to do something similar, and it has to be with all your groups, not one. And you've got to get on the same page on that. Fargo does a lot of interesting things. Everything from when a new company brings talent in, they have an entire onboarding program, a concierge service that they give to those new employees to help them get into the community and root them heavily and fast, and think welcome wagon from 40 years ago on steroids. So it's not just telling someone, it's also providing that connectivity. So I think you've got to tune and turn up the brand narrative. We tell every group that we talk to brand about, go home today and Google 3 things. What's it like to live in Fayetteville or Cumberland County? What's it like to work here? And should I move here? And then once you've done it in Google, go to YouTube and do the same thing and see what you get. I have no idea what you're going to get. My guess is you're going to get some good, some bad. I told someone the other day, I told you I was in Springfield, Missouri. The first thing you get when you Google is Springfield a great place to live is a thing that says Springfield is a great place to live. The second thing you get is, why the hell would I live in Springfield? It's hell. That's the second thing on the list. Well, you need to find a way to get that off the front page, I think. But those kind of things do work. Brand narrative is about who do you tell, what do you tell, what's the tuning, what's the messages. By the way, when people talk about the issues that are most important to them when they move, this is called the talent wars, because everybody's trying. Cost of living is #1 now for both blue-collar and white-collar workers, and your cost of living is excellent. Housing availability and cost are next, pretty good. For sale, rental housing expensive. And then it's crime and safety and health care. Again, mixed bag for you, but there are things to sell that are positive. People get most of their information from the internet. So this is about a digital audit first and a bunch of things like that. Your crime rate, several people said it's just the data or it's just people's perception. Your violent crime rate in 2022 was the same as Forsyth counties, that's same Winston, but it was higher than other places, and so it's still an issue. If you look at your property crime, Durham, Winston, Charlotte, property crimes are all higher. So your crime rate is nuanced, and you should begin to talk about it in a nuanced way. Same is true of your schools. You have school systems that, if you go onto a web page and say, what's the best school systems in North Carolina or best high schools, you end up with different things. You have a lot of good things going here. You need to project them more. And Superintendent of the Year last year, and so sell it. Fourth question we got are, what can you take to measure the results? I think young professional programs and internship programs to root your high school and college students is overwhelmingly what you should do there. Populate social media with livability videos and testimonials, and a program that you might want to start to welcome your foreign-born visitors. A lot of communities have figured this out. You don't have to attract them. You can do that if you want. You can have that kind of program But as they come into your community, foreign-born students that are graduating from Methodist or Fayetteville State, and there are many of them, welcome to your community. Lunch with the mayor. Let them draw a thing. We just challenged one community, their entire chamber board, to go out, find one foreign student at their university and have lunch with them. Just go do it. Make them feel welcome. Maybe they'll stick with you. Here is, what do you do for the really high-risk projects? We love the Bulls Bio Academy. This is one of those wraparound programs that cost a lot. So I'll go ahead and tell you that, they spend up to $10,000 annually in stipends to the individual to support their life while they're getting it changed. The average cost of an individual to go through this program is $22,000 a year, one person. But 85% complete, and they have a strong livable wage when they get out. You cannot change the lives of somebody who has lots of issues in that 20-something year old range without putting the wraparound services around it. It just doesn't work because they can't afford to be changed. They have to go back and find some way of living somewhere along the way. And so first year exploration fundraising here adds up. So overall, about $1 million to add 4 things we have at the top. The metrics of success are pretty simple for you guys. It's population and labor force growth on top of everything. It's degrees and credential growth. Everything from AAs and credentials to BAs, especially in the areas where you need them. It's enrollment in your targeted programs, the average wage of new jobs that are being created in the community, and how you move up those quality of life place rankings. If you measure that, if you move those needles, put those up on the wall and you move all those needles positive, things will get better. So just for me, final thoughts before we open it up for discussion and questions is that as a person, again, who grew up in North Carolina, Fayetteville has always been a military town, and it is a source of pride to a lot of North Carolinians that we have a place in North Carolina that has the type of patriotism and national and international brand that Fort Bragg and now Fort Liberty has brought to it. That you are a state asset and you are a national asset in part because of that base. But you're also a metro that continues to grow as you go forward. And there are places, I spent the early part of my career in Maryland, and Annapolis is also a military town. It is also one of the highest quality of life places to live in America. Different military, I understand, different things. But there is nothing that you can't do with self-determination moving forward. And the citizens of Fayetteville want to have pride in their community and want to live here. Obviously, they made that choice and want their community to grow. And there are very specific things you can do on that. It takes groups to work together. That's the hardest part about all of this, is nobody has control. We'd all love to have that command and control system like they have over at the base, where somebody says do this and everybody does that. Doesn't work that way in communities. There are too many pieces. So you have to agree to work together and collaborate. And for strategy is just about choices. Building a list of things you could do is one thing. Choosing to do something, some group of things, and money is how communities move from this to that. Somewhere back, in history, Charlotte made some choices, and Raleigh made some choices, and Greenville, South Carolina made some choices, and Charleston made some choices, and I knew Mayor Riley pretty well. He made some really hard choices along the way in Charleston that people weren't happy with, but he thought they were the right things to do. So be bold, invest in yourselves, and make good choices.